Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are very honored and pleased to have with us today Rabbi Pinchas Taylor in our ongoing Mosaica Press series. Rabbi Taylor is an inspirational scholar, sought-after educator, and popular speaker. Rabbi Taylor received his rabbinic ordination, Semichah, from the Rabbinical College of America, and currently serves as the director of adult education and outreach at the Chabad of Plantation. Rabbi Taylor is known as the celebrity life coach and founded The Ark, a successful faith-based study and coaching program. Rabbi Taylor is also the director of the American Faith Coalition, and Rabbi Taylor is the author of the popular Pillars of Faith book. And today we'll be discussing Rabbi Taylor's fascinating work, A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious, another gem in the Mosaica lineup of elegant, meaningful, and bold works. Rabbi Taylor, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. So many interesting topics in the book, in the Sefer. Let's start with dreams. What are some of the classical Jewish approaches to dreams?
So when it comes to dreams, there's a wide variety, as there always is in the spectrum of Jewish thought. There are two basically opposite perspectives. On the one hand, we certainly see, even biblically, that dreams are given a certain degree of value, even prophetic value. We find approximately 10 instances of prophetic value just in the book of Genesis alone. And then you have the other side in Jewish tradition. You find Talmudic texts that say that essentially dreams are just a mishmash of our day, rehashing of our day, and don't really contain all of that much meaning. I think probably the way that we reconcile the two, as the book kind of goes into in great detail, is that there are different types of dreams. There are dreams that have this sort of prophetic value, that have the capability to be meaningful and prophetic. And then the other side of the coin, and probably the majority of the dreams, especially dreams today, which are just kind of a rehashing of the day, or an expression of certain stimuli that you've had throughout the day, concocting itself in some sort of story for your viewing pleasure in the evenings. But both exists, both traditions in Judaism exist, but that's probably the delineating factor between the two.
Okay. And would you consider dreams to be, whether it's category A, category B, a gift from God? In other words, we go to sleep, we, put our body and soul in the hands of God, and somehow there's this reality, non-reality that pops up during our sleep. Is that a gift?
Well, I mean, the potential is there for a dream to be a gift. Certainly, sleep is a gift. One of the things that someone once asked Lubavitcher Rebbe was, why is it that God created us as creatures that need to sleep? It seems like such a waste of time. A few hours a night, 8 hours a night, whatever it is. Excuse me. That's like a third of a person's life, potentially. Like, why create a human being in such a way? Well, sleep is a gift in the sense that you ever get to the end of your day and you had like one of those days where you're like, I cannot wait for this day to end. It's just, oh my gosh, whether that had to do with things that were going on the outside or some sort of moral failing that a person had. But by the end of the day, you're just like, I cannot wait for this day to end. Well, if we were created as creatures that never needed to sleep, then that day would never end. And there would be no opportunity to restart and rejuvenate and start fresh. And so I believe sleep, the concept of sleep in and of itself, is a gift. Dreams potentially can be a gift. They can offer insight into some of the things that we may be experiencing in our waking life. But as far as sleep is concerned, that itself, the concept, is certainly a gift from God in that sense that we can always restart.
And what is the idea of fasting for a bad dream? In other words, when you wake up in the morning and and your kids or your spouse says, "Oh, I had such a bad dream," or "I had such a weird dream," and they wake up, or we wake up with this bad feeling. What is that? Is that a message? Is that God speaking to us in some way, shape, or form? And why do people and when do people fast for bad dreams?
So in Jewish tradition, that certainly that concept exists. It's Talmudic times even. It's codified in the Shulchan Aruch and the Code of Jewish Law. Uh, in that, if a person has a dream that scares them, that seems to foretell something negative, that they can and perhaps should fast in order to ameliorate it. This is something that's particularly interesting when it comes to fasting on Shabbat. Even on Shabbat, where a person's required to have 3 meals by Jewish law, that's like part of the observance of Shabbat. Even if a person had a bad dream on Friday night, that they're still able to fast on Shabbat. So it like kind of outweighs it in that sense. However, the caveat is that these days that's essentially not done. And the reason it's essentially not done is because most of the dreams today, for 2 reasons, are not of the caliber that they used to be even just a few generations ago. Certainly not of the caliber that they were in Talmudic times. Number one is because the spiritual caliber of humanity has devolved. Every generation we're devolving. So that's number one. We are much more calloused than previous generations were. And so the spiritual meaning and attainment and reality that we access in our dreams is significantly less. And number two, we are also, coupled with that, we are also the most bombarded generation when it comes to outside stimuli. And so the likelihood that what you experienced in the dream, what you saw in the dream, the likelihood of that being something that's an expression of something that you saw, smelled, touched, tasted, or heard during the day is all the more likely. There's so many times in our waking life nowadays, you'll say to yourself, like, why do I have that song in my head? You'll be humming something. Why is that song in my head? Well, unbeknownst to you, you were walking through the supermarket and this particular song was playing. And so like the whole rest of the day, you weren't consciously aware of it, but it's just stuck in your head. There's so much outside stimuli that affects us that we're not even aware of. Sometimes you have a dream where you think about someone that you haven't thought about in 30 years, someone you went to camp with 30 years ago. Well, unbeknownst to you, sometimes you're walking by a bakery or a perfume store or whatever, and you smell a smell that connects you instantly. That person wore that particular smell, or the last time you smelled something like that, you were with that particular person. Smells are powerful, sights are powerful, things that we hear are powerful in affecting the things that we dream about. And so when it comes to fasting for a dream nowadays, it's not really a widespread practice. Again, for those 2 reasons. Number one, spiritually, the caliber, the spiritual caliber that we're at it's unlikely that we have dreams that are prophetic or meaningful in that sense in value. And so it isn't an actual apprehension about the future. And secondly, we don't fast because the likelihood is that whatever we dreamt about maybe is just something that for whatever reason we began thinking about in our waking life, and it manifests itself in the dream rather than being an actual foretelling of a future event. And so if a person does have a bad dream today, typically the way in which you deal with it are, number one, either you there is in some Sidurim, there is a small annulment of your dream, which is kind of like the annulment of vows that we do prior to the high holidays, prior to Rosh Hashanah, where you go in front of a group of people in the same way that you do before Rosh Hashanah, and you say, if I've made any vows and haven't kept anything, and haven't made specific that this is without the force of a vow, I hereby annul everything that I have said or have done. And those people, they say everything is forgiven for you and you should be not influenced by it, and you can go on with go on your merry way. There's a similar formula that's given with dreams in some Siddurim, where you go in front of a group of your friends and you say, "I've dreamt a dream," and so forth, and they say that they only interpret it in a good way, which, if it was going to happen, will now only come into fruition in a good way. That's one way that people deal with it today. It's also not so common today, but it's out there. The second is by during Birchas Kayanim, during the priestly blessing that the Shliach Tzibor says, the Chazan, the person leading the prayer service, when he's saying in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei of the Amidah, in the morning prayer, when he says the priestly blessing, or if you're in Israel, when the priests actually get up to recite the priestly blessing, or if you're in the diaspora, when the priests get up to bless the people on a Yom Tov, then there is a formula that is mentioned about if I have dreamed a dream that is not a good one, may it be annulled right here and right now. So rather than fasting, these are some of the other ways that people tend to go to in these generations.
Okay. Moving on to the topic of astrology. Astrology is extremely popular. You've got astrology columns and all the magazines and newspapers, and people open them in the morning to see what their day is going to be like. It's hard to imagine leading rabbis that do get newspapers that would open up to the astrology section. Why is astrology so popular, and what is the Jewish Talmudic general approach to astrology?
So I think astrology is popular amongst people because there are two things. Number one, people want to know the future, right? Everyone is kind of curious to know how things are going to turn out. And if you have at least even a theoretic pathway to knowing that, people are curious to know about it. And number two, the astrology that focuses on personality, people enjoy learning and thinking more about themselves and their personality. Personality tests are quite popular. Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, all of the personality tests and formulations. People like getting insights into themselves that they may never have been familiar with or thought about. So that's one reason why I think people in general are curious about this. As far as Judaism's stance on astrology, so when it comes to predicting the future, that's a complete no-no. We're not allowed to predict the future in any way, whether that's through consulting the stars or through consulting psychics or tarot cards, Ouija boards, whatever mechanism a person uses, trying to predict the future is something that is not allowed, and that's based on the pasuk that says, "Tamim tihi im Hashem alekecha," you shall be pure and whole with the Lord your God. Meaning that when a person starts relying on either the stars or other means towards predicting the future, God is going to be dropped from the picture. So, for example, if I apply for a job and they tell me that I'm going to get the response to the job next week. So if I go to the local astrologer and I want to know, well, am I going to get the job or not? So if the astrologer says, no, you're not going to get this job, well, I'm not going to pray to God. I know that I'm not destined for it. It's not going to come to me. And if he says, yes, you are going to get the job, then I'm also not going to pray to God that I should get this job because I know that it's not coming to me. So eventually what happens with astrology, in particular, when you try to predict the future, the issue is that these mechanisms, whatever the mechanism is that God is dropped from the picture. That's the problem. And so that's why even if it were to be real, astrology, Ouija boards, tarot cards, all, fill in the blank, even if it were to be real and you really could predict the future from it, it's something that's forbidden to us. That's number one. However, the concept of being a little bit more familiar with yourself and knowing perhaps a little bit more about your personality based on, for example, what day you were born, what hour you were born, what month you were born, and so forth, is something that is discussed Talmudically. Towards the end of the Gemara in Shabbos, the Talmud volume Shabbos, and there are indications of what a person's personality would gravitate towards if you're born on a certain day or a certain hour or during a particular month. Month's not really mentioned in the Talmud. Month's mentioned in other sources, including Kabbalistic sources. But collectively, Jewish law and thought is not against the idea of finding a bit more about your personality from astrological realities. The issue becomes when a person thinks that this is a crutch to lean on, that they're somehow not responsible to fulfill the Torah or to be a certain way because they have the excuse of being born under a certain star. The idea always has to be embedded in a person's mind that free will trumps everything, that there is no mazel for the Jewish people as far as being confined to a particular destiny. We always have the capacity for free will, which means that we can always transcend the system that God set up that sort of projects the matrix of the universe that we live in.
So in order to discover more about ourselves, could we set up the Orthodox Association of Astrologers? And could that be an address for people to come and say, I just want to find out a little bit more about myself. I believe in free will. I'm 100% a free will person. Are there any responsa that deal with consulting astrologers that understand whatever it is that they need to understand about the zodiac and the stars and all that?
Well, we have Rishonim that actually compiled works on astrology. The Ibn Ezra, for example, has many works that go into these particular ideas about astrology. There's various types of astrology. This particular type of examining personality is obviously Talmudic, and it's mentioned in Rishonim, particularly by the Ibn Ezra. So quite a vast array of works from him. But the idea of assessing personality or spending too much time on this type of thing may be a waste of time. Not because astrology is not true, but one of the reasons that astrology is considered ascientific is because of the fact that it can't be tested. You could have two people that are born under the same mazel, they're born the same month, the same day, the same year. You have twins that are, not all, everything is the same, and they can have very different personalities and talents and abilities, and the question is, well, then how do we test to see if this astrology actually bears any ground? The problem is, when it comes to personality, there are so many different things, so many variables that shape our personality, that knowing what astrological sign you're born under would give you only a very limited look at the totality of your personality. So if you're born, you're a Gemini, and you're born a certain month and a certain day and a certain hour, and some other person was born the exact same time, hour, and whatever, but you both grew up in very different homes, or your parents are very different people and inherited a different set of genetics, well, that's going to play a major factor into your personality development. And so astrology is not considered scientific nowadays, not because of the inherent flaw of astrology, that it itself, I mean, they can't find a mechanism that, connects what is it that influences Jupiter on this hour to have some sort of influence in your life. The mechanism's not there either from the scientific vantage point. But the main reason that it's not considered scientific is because of the fact that it's not testable. And so if you wanted to set up, theoretically, if you wanted to set up the Orthodox Committee of Jewish Astrologers or something like that, I think, from one vantage point, it would be, as far as permissibility, it would probably be okay. On the other hand, it would definitely be a slippery slope, and probably in many ways could be a waste of time, and lead people in a wrong direction, even if the committee, understood all of the bearings of what astrology is, what it isn't. The people that would be coming to them for consultation would likely not know all the intricacies because they're not part of this thing. They just want to know what's up about them and find out more about their personality. And I think that could certainly be a slippery slope as far as its practical implementation.
Fascinating. Those creatures with the wings that flap around and come down to earth, and all those movies where the angels test people and put people in different situations, and the good angels and the bad angels. How do we understand the Jewish view of angels and their purpose? And is it the very fact that we use the word angel that just throws us off? Because the minute we use that in English speaking worlds, it just has so many different connotations that just, put us in the wrong direction.
Well, I think so. And one of the things that I often remark to people when talking about spiritual matters is people ask a variety of questions that talk about spiritual concepts. For example, do Jews believe in the afterlife? Do Jews believe in heaven? Do Jews believe in hell? Do Jews believe in Satan? Do Jews all of the pick your spiritual concept, and that's a common question that's asked. The answer typically to all of the above is yes, but no. Meaning, yes, conceptually, the concept is there, but likely not in the way that you're thinking about, because the way that you've been thinking about is likely shaped by the books you've read, the movies you've watched, the stories you've heard, the artwork you've seen, whatever it is, that's shaped your view. So like when you say the word angel, the first picture that people conjure up is some winged baby floating on a cloud playing the harp, with a halo on its head and just sort of like drifting through existence. That's sort of like because that's what Hallmark cards say that they are, and that's how they're depicted in our culture. The concept of an angel is a malach, means a messenger. It's a divine conduit that God uses in order to carry out a particular mission, to express God's bounty in a particular way. And in other words, you have an infinite God who's communicating and facilitating and bestowing his bounty upon a finite world. There needs to be a mechanism, or I don't say there needs to be, but God set up the world that there is a mechanism that goes from infinite God and infinite bounty to limited particular situation that needs to be dealt with and expressed in a certain way. So when God wants to heal somebody, well, the mechanism that God uses to express that is an angel that facilitates the blessing of the healing. I'll give you an example of how we see that in normal life. Okay, so the concept of needing a mechanism from infinity to finite. So if a person has, let's say, a love of somebody, whether that's their parent, a spouse, a friend, whoever, pick the love of your life. And let's describe that feeling of love as sort of this infinite, non-definable experience that you feel inside, right? In fact, that's how we oftentimes describe it. We say it's beyond words. I can't describe the feeling that I have. And so love, for lack of a better term, is like this infinite experience that you carry it with you. And however, how is it that the other person, the beloved, the one that you love, how is it that they can ever know about or benefit from the love that you have inside? The only way is through a conduit, right? So that might be through words, that might be through hugs, that might be through a kiss, that might be through a gift. These are different mechanisms that express the infinite love, that are an expression of the infinite love that a person has directed to the other. So in other words, in order for the infinite love that I have inside of myself to be expressed to you in a finite way, there has to be a mechanism that conveys my love, right? It's the sum total of essence of the love is not expressed in my ability, and the vastness of the love is not expressed merely in the flowers or merely in the gift or the hug or the kiss, but that is a mechanism that's utilized in order for me to bestow that infinity of love within me in a finite specific way. And it works a similar way with God and his interaction with the world. That God who is infinite and has infinite bounty, when expressing God's self, when God wishes to bestow God's bounty into the physical realm, there are mechanisms that go into carrying the infinity of God into being able to be expressed into a finite, tangible world. And we call one of the steps along the way in this chain from infinity to finite is the malach, is the angel, a spiritual entity that conveys a certain aspect of what God wishes to bestow upon the world.
And traditional Judaism posits that there are different types and different categories of malachim, of angels. How important is it to understand that, study that? What's the benefit of that? It's not something that's classically taught. Even in Jewish day schools, okay, here's your 352 types of angels, and this is, what they do, and this is how it works, and why not, and how important is it?
Well, I think as a rule of thumb, people tend to be more interested in that which is less practical, right? The less practical something is, the more I'm curious about it, because it doesn't really play that much a role in my life. If you'll get a lot more people to come to your Torah class if the subject matter is something about the afterlife, or something more nebulous or mystical, than it is about, okay, we're going to go over the laws of shaking lulav. Right? Not because shaking lulav is much more valuable and practical as far as our lives now, but the more practical something is, the less interested, for whatever reason, people tend to be. And so how important is it in the practical sense? Not really all that important, because of the fact that at the end of the day, an angel is a mechanism. And even if there's 10 gradations of angels, these are all mechanisms in which God utilizes in order to convey his bounty to the world. And so when I pray, I don't pray to angels, because at the end of the day, an angel is a creation. So I go directly to God, and really it doesn't matter to me how God goes about facilitating it. It might be interesting to sort of know the pathway that's been delineated by our sages as to how this chain-like process works, where God's infinite bounty becomes manifest in a physical world. But at the end of the day, for me to know the mechanics is not essentially important. It's like knowing how to use a computer. Like, I know that when I press the letter P on the computer, the letter P is going to come up when I type it. I don't necessarily know all of these stages in between, and how that might be interesting to learn, but it's not really necessary for me to be able to use a computer to know all the inner workings of how pressing that key becomes the image of a P on the screen. I don't need to know all the steps in that interaction in order to use the computer properly. So in order to live a proper Jewish life, you don't need to know necessarily all the mechanisms that God utilizes to facilitate God's infinite bounty to a finite world. It might be something of interest to you. It might be something that for you might be helpful, or give a little bit of icing on the cake, or some extra interest in the things that you're doing. But as far as a practical matter, it's not for the most part knowing all the gradations of angels. It's important to know just that it's there. But how much focus to give on it over the course of one's day, week, month, year, or life, I'd say minimal.
Okay. We just completed all of the holidays from the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and now we have moved into that very important period that's called Halloween. which is, I think, coming up or is now being celebrated. Um, Ghosts, demons, goblins, all those creatures that walk around on Halloween collecting candy. What is the Jewish view on all of that? And where does Maimonides, the Rambam, fit in that picture?
So when it comes to demons, first of all, one thing that we always have to know, whether we're talking about angels or demons or anything in between, that ultimately God is the source of all. An angel doesn't have its own free will. A demon doesn't have its own free will. It is a mechanism that God is utilizing in order to facilitate a certain outcome in the world. So a demon would be, for lack of a better term, an angel in reverse. The angels that facilitate negative impacts or things that would be harsh in the world. These are the other side, the forces that kind of balance out with the angels is the demons. Demons are written about extensively in the Talmud. It's something that is par for the course. There are reasons to believe, that the Rambam rejected a lot of these things that were deemed sort of superficial in his viewpoint. Things like astrology and that it actually has any sort of real telling of the future value. The Rambam seems to reject that. Similarly, with demons and other things that would be considered perhaps like superstitious, the Rambam seems to reject. There are various sources in our tradition. They're all listed and gone through in the book, where the case could be made that the Rambam didn't really believe those things, and that it was sort of, for various reasons, just something that he conveyed on paper, perhaps for his generation, perhaps for his situation. This was a teaching mechanism that the Rambam used in order to for the greater good, living in Egypt and people being highly steeped in superstition, that he just rejected the concept of demons and astrology and all of these sort of superficial matters. The book goes through what that might look like, but that is sort of typically the way in which we would view these things. As far as ghosts are concerned, there was it's not something I would worry too much about. I teach in a seminary.
There are scary ghosts, and then there's Casper the Friendly
There's
Ghost.
Casper, and then there's right. So a girl once asked me in seminary. She watched some show on the Discovery Channel or the History Channel about ghost hunters and different things that were happening. Is this true or not? So what I told her is that I would be more concerned with the damage that's being done to you by watching TV than the damage that's going to potentially be done to you by an actual ghost. Not that they don't exist or can't exist. A ghost, in theory, would be a coarse aspect of the person's soul, which in some literature is called things like the guf dak, the thin body, right, which is sort of like the image of the person that you can kind of see through. It's discussed in a variety of sources in a variety of contexts. The tselem, these are different spiritual terminologies that perhaps can have an overlap in the way that people think of ghosts. And this is a soul that, for one reason or another, is not able to ascend to its final resting place and sort of becomes etched or embedded in the physical world. It's like it's stuck there for some reason. They're not out to get people, and they're not like these concepts of like ghosts and hauntings and a big white sheet floating through the window, and I don't see much evidence or description of that in Jewish literature. But there is a concept of the guf dak or the tselem or other sort of like quasi-spiritual the goof duck is described as like what sort of binds the body with the soul. It's like it's not the body, it's not physical, but it's not the soul. It's not completely spiritual. There's like a form to it, and so like it's sort of like the merging piece between body and spirit. And so could that be overlapped and thought of in the context of ghosts? Perhaps there is at least one source that describes one way in which a ghost could sort of, or a soul could sort of be trapped here, would be like an incident where a person is killed in a very tragic sort of way. A severe car accident where the neshama like leaves the body, but it's very disoriented and it's sort of stuck in it. It hasn't had the opportunity to fully merge into the completely spiritual worlds yet, and is sort of stuck here to a degree. So again, I wouldn't give too much thought to like, are the ghosts out to get me? Are the demons out to get me? Are all of these different entities lurking in the night? I wouldn't be too concerned about it. Not saying it's not real, not saying it doesn't have sources in our tradition, but as far as practicality is concerned, how much should we be worried about it and focused on it? Probably pretty minimal.
Millions upon millions of people believe in UFOs and believe that governments are hiding these UFOs because they don't want us to get all worked up about being conquered by aliens. Can traditional Jews believe in extraterrestrial life?
So there is a variety of viewpoints that begin to be talked about in the Rishonim. The Rishonim, the medieval philosophers, the first one that, as far as I am aware of, to discuss this particular point is Rabbi Chazdai Kreshkash, medieval scholar, medieval sage, who is open to the idea. He writes in his philosophical work that in the same way that God created life on planet Earth, could be that there's life elsewhere in the universe. So one way to think about it might be like the verse that we say every day in the Psalms and Tehillim, Malchutcha, Malchut Kol Olamim, that in your kingship is a kingship amongst Olamim, worlds, right? We tend to think of those as spiritual worlds, but there's no reason also to think that it couldn't be talking about physical worlds. Why not? So there's a certain degree of openness amongst some of the Jewish philosophers. Rabbi Kreshkash's student, Rabbi Yosef Albo, disagreed with his teacher and said that there's really not a reason to think that there's life out there, and it's not possible that there's life out there. In fact, why? Because if you look in the Torah, the centrality of everything is planet Earth and human beings in particular. It's a very anthropocentric text. And so everything, even when the sun, the moon, and the stars are created in Bereshit, which we just read, and in Genesis, which we just read, why does it say the sun, moon, and stars are put in their place? In order to give light upon the earth. Like everything that's out there is in order to enhance and facilitate life on planet Earth. And so if everything in the universe was there for us, that we are, even when you want to talk about different planets in the solar system, well, all the planets are in the solar system, and the solar system is in the proper place in the galaxy, and the galaxy is in the proper place amongst other galaxies in order to facilitate life, because if it wasn't done that particular way, life wouldn't be able to exist. So all of those things in the universe, you could say, are there to facilitate that life on planet Earth be what it is. Given the centrality of human beings, from the Jewish standpoint, if you accept the Bible as true, if you accept the Torah as true, Rabbi Yosef Albo would say that it's not possible to conceive of life on other planets. And why? Because like, what would be the purpose? How would humanity be helped or facilitated if there's life on Neptune? Like, what would that be? So from a philosophical vantage point, that the human being is the crux of creation, and everything else in the universe is facilitating the human being as the crux of creation, what would be the point of having life on some other planet? And so there's an interesting Kabbalistic work written by Rabbi Eliyahu Horowitz a few hundred years ago in his Sefer HaBris, where he goes through sort of a balance between those two perspectives. And this seems to be, from my understanding, the sort of mainstream viewpoint, according to there is a possibility for there to be life on another planet that's not outside the scope of things. However, at the same time, that whatever creature would be out there would not have a certain thing that humanity has, and that's free will. The Torah says that the human being is created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. Our commentaries say that that means free will, among other things. And so whatever creature would be out there would be a creature that does not have free will. That doesn't mean that it has to be, a lowly creature. The angels also don't have free will. The human being is the only creature in the universe that has free will. That's why, by the way, that it tends to be that, like in prophecy, when Ezekiel is talking about his the chariot, and when the spiritual worlds are manifest in physical depictions, one of the ways that angels are depicted is as animals, because in the same way that animals don't have free will, they're sort of confined to their nature, angels are the same way, essentially spiritually the same thing. And so Rabbi Horowitz, Rabbi Eliyahu Horowitz in Sefer HaBris says that any creature that would be out there, the caveat would be that they wouldn't have free will. An interesting thing was discussed. There's a remark in the Sefer HaBris bringing out a pasuk, a verse from the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, in the section that talks about the song of Dvorah. There's a verse in there that says, "Cursed is Meroz, cursed is its inhabitants." And so the Talmud, the Gemara, asks, what is Meroz? And one of the opinions is that Meroz is a star. So perhaps, the Sefer HaBris suggests, perhaps that could be an open indication of extraterrestrial life, right? Cursed is Meroz, a star, and its inhabitants, meaning the inhabitants of that star, is one. It's possible to see that even scripturally there's open proof of life on other planets. Again, take that as you will. I remember that there were multiple correspondences between a Dr. Belleville Green, who was working in Minnesota. He was part of NASA's exobiology program, Jewish man, and part of NASA's exploration for extraterrestrial life. And he became observant. And when he became observant, he wrote several correspondences to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, asking if, now that he's observant, if he should continue exploring the universe for signs of life. Or is that just like a waste of time? And so the Rebbe's response to him was that you should continue. Why not? Because why limit God? Why say that God can only create life here? To the contrary, anything that you do find will only bring out the glory of God. But the idea that there's advanced civilizations out there and whatnot didn't seem to be something that the Rebbe was particularly endorsing of. That our human being's intelligence is given to us to help facilitate our free will. And so elsewhere, if there were intelligent beings like us, that they would, that part of the only reason that we have intelligence that way we do is to facilitate free will. So the idea of like colonies and civilizations out there is not as ubiquitously believed and whatnot. But again, it could be that there is something out there, just like the angels have this superiority in their spiritual perception of things, yet have a lacking that they don't have free will. Perhaps there could be something out there that displays the same qualities, that is in some ways superior to us, but in other ways inferior in that they don't have free will.
Before we conclude, Rabbi Taylor, what's next for you personally? Are you working on a new book? Without spoiling anything, is that something you're working on? What topics or what areas are you now exploring?
I am. I'm pretty far along. I'm working on oh man, do I want to? I guess I could say,
You
right?
don't have, you don't have to. You don't have to. It's
It's why not? I've talked to them at Mosaica Press already about it, but it's still a little while before it gets produced. It's going through all of the social issues in our politics and examining them from the full spectrum of Torah thought. So everything from abortion, immigration, LGBTQ, you name it. And God willing, it'll be discussed in this particular book.
fascinating. I know there's so much more to A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious, and we urge all our viewers and listeners to go online and purchase it on Amazon directly from Mosaica Press. And Rabbi Taylor, thank you so much for there it is, Pillars of Faith
Yeah.
and the A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious. Again, urge all our viewers and listeners to go online and simply go to your local bookstore and purchase it. It's really worthwhile. There's so much in it. Rabbi Taylor, thank you so much, and you should continue to do all the great work that you do. Thank you.
Amen. It's a good pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.